I'm delighted to be joined for our chat today by Ian Madigan. Welcome back, Ian. Hope you had a nice Christmas.
Great Christmas, yeah. It was book ended with my sister's wedding, and then Sonny's first birthday, and we hosted Christmas in our house. So it's been all go for the last couple of weeks, but very enjoyable.
And down to Thomond Park as well. So you were very, very busy. A reminder that the Indo Sport podcast is, of course, sponsored by Energia. Energia sponsors rugby in Ireland at all levels, at grassroots with the Energia AIL, and as official energy partner to Leinster, Connacht and the Irish men's and women's teams. The Energia Rugby for All initiative supports inclusion, welcoming everyone of all abilities to participate in the game. Find out more at energia.ie/rugby and avail of an exclusive home energy offer for rugby fans. Ian, do you miss playing rugby at this time of year?
Yeah, I love these games. Yeah, the two things I miss most: the trip to South Africa for 2 weeks. Usually in the depths of the Irish winter, and then it was traditionally Stephen's Day that we played on. And yeah, I got that Thomond fixture quite a bit. In my years in Leinster, and that was always a highlight. Didn't always win down there, but we had a couple of memorable wins. And then if you played at home, it would usually be on New Year's Eve. And if you got a win that night, it was always followed by a very good night out. So fond memories from those times. And yeah, I certainly do miss them. It's nice being part of those games, even as a pundit or a commentator. You still feel kind of part of the Christmas spirit of those games.
Yeah, I've always loved the Christmas interviews. Pros. I actually wish they made it Leinster, Munster, Stephen's Day, no matter the day. The Welsh regions still do it Stephen's Day, like no matter what day it falls on. I'm assuming because it was a weekend this year that the teams were keen to keep it to a Saturday schedule, just maybe for their training week potentially. But I love it when it actually pops up kind of randomly on a Thursday or a Wednesday.
Yeah, I'm the exact same. I think Stephen's Day is a very special day, whether you're going racing in Limerick or Leopardstown or going to watch sport. It's a great occasion, and yeah, I always enjoyed that fixture. It was always a sacrifice I was happy to make on Christmas Day, going a bit easier.
Yeah, I'm sure it's an interesting one as a player. So we had two interpros on Saturday, kind of absorbing and intriguing. People, I suppose, have been questioning maybe the quality, but we had Connacht 24, Ulster 29 in the Dexcom Stadium, and there was a double header. Obviously, Munster Leinster then was the big one that night. You were down there for Premier Sport. Munster 8, Leinster 13. Interesting, kind of the aftermath of the weekend, Ian, about people talking about again. I suppose the style of play in rugby now and what we're seeing on the pitch. Like, there's specifics, obviously, of how the various teams played and the storylines we can get into in a few minutes. But I first want to just kind of start off with this clip of Tadhg Beirne in the post-match press conference, just kind of echoing what a lot of people are saying about the direction of travel rugby is going on since they kind of tweaked the rules around escorting and maybe incentivising kicking contestables. He was talking after the game, and we'll just run this clip and we can maybe discuss some of the things he brings up.
Let's be honest, the style of game's gone backwards. If we're being serious, teams are just kicking the ball. Why? Because it's a 50-50 chance of getting the ball back. That's the teams are going to set pieces more, because if you go up to the 50-50 in the air and you get a lock on, you get a scrum, and if you have a good scrum, you can get a penalty into the corner. It's just becoming a set piece and kicking game with the way they've kind of changed the rules. And that's just, you see teams kicking more and more, and I think it's just going to continue going that way unless they decide to do something about it.
Interesting to hear one of the leading players in Ireland in the world game kind of speaking about, kind of echoing what I would say like your average rugby fan is probably saying around a lot of the games that you're watching. I thought it was interesting, like the lowest number of kicks across the weekend was in Bath Northampton across the Premiership and the URC, and you could argue that was the most exciting game, or certainly a game with a lot of free-flowing rugby. Like, I watched Exeter Leicester yesterday. There was 59 kicks in that game. There was only 33 in Bath Northampton, and it did feel like it was maybe two phases kick for a long period of time. Like, how do you think the Irish teams are adapting to this new world order? Because I've seen a lot of people saying, oh, they're only complaining because they're not good at it, or they're not adapting quicker than other teams. Like, that may be true, but I still think the point he makes stands as a product. But how do you think the Irish teams are actually adapting to the way rugby has gone in the last while?
Yeah, there definitely is frustration from the Irish players. I know James Lowe came out and spoke a couple of weeks ago, and It's interesting. Quite often, the best interviews come after games because there's not as much media briefing, and it's still a bit raw, and you can sense the frustration from Tadhg there. And Munster wanted to play, and that was indicative in the stats in the sense that they had 50% more possession than Leinster did. And of the two teams that won at the weekend, they both had 50% less possession in Leinster and Ulster. So on your question of like how do I think the Irish teams have adapted to the law changes, they've been incremental. Like while like the aerial contest law change was significant, there's been other law changes that have kind of trickled in, or it's how refs are adjudicating the game has changed. And a big one of those is at the breakdown, where we've seen the laws, in my opinion, have trended towards the defensive team. So, when I was playing even 5 years ago, and in particular 10 years ago, as a attacking player, you could come into the breakdown, you could get away with going off your feet, you could neck roll, you could croc roll, the ball carrier could have an additional roll on the ground. You used to be able to seal, which you're now no longer allowed to do. And what that has resulted in is the defending player coming in can effectively seal by poaching, right? So you can win the space by poaching. You've obviously got to stay on your feet, but it is becoming really difficult to hold on to the ball. And then what's compounded that is you now have teams like Leinster in particular that are counter-rucking really aggressively. And what that's resulting in is it's exhausting attacking, because you're going into a judo wrestle at every breakdown where you could have 2 or 3 players counter-rucking you. If you want to go, 7, 10, 15 phases, your team is going to be exhausted. And if you look at the teams that are doing that are really struggling across Europe, Harlequins are playing high into the phase count. They're then getting turned over inevitably if they don't score. And then when they're defending, they don't have the energy to get off the line in a cohesive fashion. They're not getting off the line together. You've got some guys shooting because that's the defensive system. Some guys that are too tired, they miss the jump, or they don't have the speed or the energy to get off the line. And Connacht are very similar. If you look at like a lot of the stats from Connacht are really impressive in the traditional sense, high possession stats. Their pass quality is excellent. But they're going high into the phase count, and then you're seeing them getting exposed defensively. And the Ulster game was no different at the weekend. They, Connacht largely dominated the first 33 minutes of the game. And look, they were 10-0 up and fully deserved of that, and arguably should have been further ahead. But then you look at the final 7 minutes of the half, Ulster get 2 opportunities in the Connacht 22, and they come away with 2 tries. And they're going in at half time, 2 points up, and arguably considerably fresher than Connacht. They come out then in the first 20 minutes of the second half. They blow Connacht away, and the game was largely won. And while Connacht give themselves a chance at the very end of the game, they were 16 points clear with 8-9 minutes to go. Like, I know they've only won by 2 points, but in my opinion, they've won comprehensively. Or 5 points they won by in the end. There was a kick at the end. And then the other interesting point, Will, was, speaking to Leo Cullen after the game, I asked him, straight up, or with how the laws have gone, are you more comfortable defending? And, I don't have the exact quote, and I don't want to misquote Leo, but in essence, he was saying that the way the laws have gone, they're more comfortable defending, and they don't want to play high into the phase count. And you can see that with how Leinster are playing. It's 4, 5, 6 phases. They're not getting the picture they want. They go aerial, and they're while they don't have high possession stats, they're forcing teams to play from their own areas. And because they're a power team, they're really disrupting the breakdown with their counter-rucking. That's then giving the opposition slow ruck ball, and Leinster are just getting off the line really hard. And it's the same again, really.
Lots of interesting things there. Yeah, you mentioned Leinster. Like, they only had 38% possession against Munster, which would have been an unthinkable stat for a long periods of, say, the Lancaster era, when they, as you say, they were maybe going a lot higher in the face count. So, if teams are playing that way in the main, I want to ask you, say, I watched a bit of Toulouse La Rochelle last night. Like, Toulouse put 60 points on La Rochelle, and people, when they think of Toulouse, they don't think of the things you're describing now as to what a lot of teams are doing. So if we look at Toulouse as kind of a gold standard in many ways of how the game should be played, like when you watch them generally, not specific to last night, 60 points and they scored a lot of nice tries, Dupont was running amok. Like, are Toulouse saying we don't want to do we don't want to play this way. We want to stay true to our ideals, or a team like that? Like, is there, like, because they're still having success. I know they didn't win the Champions Cup last year, but they won the French league and are still at the top of the game, and they're very eye catching still in how they play. Like, are they kind of refusing to go with this new trend? A team like that?
Yeah, and if you look at the stats with Toulouse, it's different. It's different to what other teams are doing, and you've got their big point of difference is keeping the ball alive. So if you go high into the phase count or high in possession, and you're having loads and loads of breakdowns, that's coming back to the point that I was making of lots of rucking, exhaustion, dealing with people counter rucking. Toulouse have the ability of keeping the ball alive with their offloading game and their passing game. They're consistently moving the point of contact. What does an offloading game give you? And this is the key with teams that are attacking, and full credit to Ulster. They're attacking really well and they're actually going high into the phase count. But the difference with them is they're being really efficient in how they're doing it. They're choosing their moments when to go high into the phase count. When they're winning a physical duel, maybe on the edge, they're then playing on the front foot. And the two big areas where you can attack against an unstructured defense, if you win an aerial contest, you're then attacking against a defensive line that's retreating, that is unstructured. The backfield is also unstructured. If you get an offload away, you are now attacking against a team that is unstructured. Like, teams are practicing defensive systems week in, week out. Who's at pillar? Who's at 20? Who's at 30? Who's applying pressure to the out half? Who's at 40? Who's covering the runner outside the out half and across the line? Teams know that system inside out. When you win an aerial duel or you get an offload away, you're now attacking against a defensive system that is unstructured. Teams don't practice that a whole lot in training. That is where Toulouse are then picking players off. They're able to find soft shoulders. They're able to win one-on-ones. They're then able to compound an offload with a further offload. And we saw it last night with La Rochelle. Like, they blew them away. It was and they played to their strengths, Toulouse. You've got obviously Dupont in the best 9 in the world, who has a kicking game that you need to keep the backfield covered. He probes really well, which results in the 10, 20, and 30 of the defending team having to be much tighter, because he's the ability to bounce outside and even interest the third defender out from the breakdown. What does that result in? More space in the wide channels. You then move it with a slick passer like Ntamack, and then you've got such quality like Capuzzo, Ramos in the wide channels. Whereas if you can give those guys genuine 3v3 with 20 meters of space, they'll make something happen more often than not. And we saw that last night.
It's funny what you're describing with the offloading game and the benefits, or what it unlocks in terms of what you're facing in opposition defence. It's what a lot of people are saying winning this contestable kick does as well. And that's a curious thing, that like offloading is almost as valuable to the game, or a contestable kick, winning that is as valuable as offloading. When I think if you polled rugby fans, 100 people, they would all say we'd much rather watch more offloading than more kicking, and yet the rewards are very similar to what you're describing to those two things.
Yeah, and like I'd argue that Leinster's two most important players are their second rows in Joe McCarthy, because he's so destructive at the breakdown and what he does with counter rucking, and when he's carrying the ball, he consistently gets gain line. His ability to keep his feet means he's very rarely a turnover threat when he's carrying. And RG Snyman, because of his offloading ability. Like, I know it was the Dragons a few weeks ago, but he comes on with, in the second half of that game and completely turns the game. He adds an extra dimension to that Leinster attack, and they do look a little bit blunt without him. Why is Stu McCluskey come into favour in the Irish setup? Because he has an offloading ability as a 12. He's the ability to keep his feet, get his hands free. If it's not on, he can keep driving. We can win the ball on the ground. But also he's the ability of getting an offload away where you're then attacking against the unstructured. So while Tadhg and for example James Lowe have been frustrated, you have to adapt with the game, and there's certain players that are doing that and doing it really well. Like, you look at Tommy O'Brien, Tom Roebuck, right? Ethan Hooker as wingers. They've adapted their game. It's repeat effort, the ability to get up in the air, compete, win the ball or create breaking ball, and then the ability to defend high in the defensive line. And if it goes over the top of you, you've got the speed to turn and burn. And how those guys talk about the aerial contest is very different to how other people are talking about it. It's an art form.
Yeah, Tom Rowe. People aren't going to Twickenham to watch Tom Rowe. You know, they're not going to Loftus Versfeld or Cape Town to watch Ethan Hooker, though. You know, it's funny. I agree with you. Like they've become very influential, especially Tom Roebuck and how England are playing. It's just funny that's how things have shifted. That like they're the names tripping off your tongue as kind of the the key guys benefiting at the moment. To go to Munster Leinster then, because you mentioned the statistics, and I suppose reading through these kind of illustrates maybe the direction the game is now going. So Leinster win 13-8. Kind of an arm wrestle. I found it very absorbing. Like I actually thought it was a really, really engaging game. I was very, very entertained. But go through some of the statistics. So Munster had 63% territory. They had 62% possession. They had 8 offloads to Leinster's 4. They made 190 metres to Leinster's 104. They had 7 line breaks to Leinster's 1. They beat 19 defenders to Leinster's 13. The one edge Leinster had statistically in a big way was they made 185 tackles to Munster's 122, and they generally tackled quite well. Like, it's just funny reading through those stats. If you didn't know the score, if you covered the score and read those statistics, you would probably assume, or maybe you wouldn't in the modern game, but you would probably have a fair idea that Munster would have won that game, but that's not how it played out. So what did those stats tell you versus what your eyes told you watching the game? Like, how do you assess everything?
Well, I think Richie Murphy touched on it after Leinster played Ulster. He said, look, we knew what was coming. It's, they look to win the physical contest. It's forwards around the corner, 3 options. Gibson Park plays the option. They resource the ruck really well. But we believe that if we can get bodies in front and contest the breakdown, there aren't multi-layers to the Leinster attack. And full credit to Ulster, they did it really well for probably 50 minutes. But then the power comes off the bench for Ulster, and the final 10, 15 minutes, they really got on top. And had that game continued for another 20, 30 minutes, Leinster were very much in control of that game. So Munster knew what was coming, and they did a good job in managing the Leinster attack. And I think off the back of the slow start Leinster had to the season, they've landed on a game plan that they think is going to win them games. And it has done. They've won 6 in a row now. And they've got, 28 out of a possible 30 points. Will that game plan win them the URC, or more importantly, the Champions Cup? I don't think it will, and I think they know that themselves. They know that they're going to have to add multi-layers to their attack in particular, to be able to break teams down. What happens if you get off to a slower start and you've got to chase the game? Are you going to just stay with this power game and trying to out-muscle teams? What happens when you come up against a really powerful team, the likes of the South African opposition, the top French opposition, and you're not necessarily getting the quick ruck ball, or you're not necessarily getting over the gain line? You're going to need a bit of intricacy to break them down. And Leinster will add those layers, but maybe this is the season that they're looking to peak for the right time. And maybe that's hopeful thinking, and I'm saying that very much with a Leinster hat on. But winning rugby is winning rugby at the end of the day, and they're finding a way at the moment. But the worrying stats for me, like pass accuracy is something you'd always associate with Leinster. Connacht are coming number 1 there, albeit with only 2 wins in the league. Leinster are down in 11th in the URC. And what does that tell you? It tells you it's probably not a big focus in training. You're probably not going high into the phase count in training. They're probably practicing the way they're playing. They're practicing winning rugby, which is what's working for them. But you're not getting players practicing passing under pressure consistently, and that's filtering through in games. And we saw it again at the weekend. I know it was a dewy ball, but the pass accuracy just wasn't quite there. There was glimmers of opportunities, and then a poor pass would come in, and when you're coming up against quality defenses, those opportunities dry themselves up with one inaccurate pass.
Yeah, there was one incident in the first half where like a Munster drop ball in the Leinster half, and Leinster had a chance with like 3 or 4 men out wide to spin it out, and it's a long way, 60 metres maybe, but like with quick passing there, they at least make, you'd say, get inroads into the 22. The ball was just kind of skittled along the ground, and the chance was gone. It's funny that you're saying like the pass accuracy, like that a lot of people have been pointing to Like, would that not be obvious when they're reviewing the game that that's dropped and they say, okay, guys, we need to really work on this now? Like, I'm surprised that it's still such a glaring issue, because passing accuracy, you think, like, having to build like a new attacking framework will be one thing, but passing accuracy should be fixable, I would think, during the course of a season with just but by, as you say, practicing it under pressure. And it's probably been one of the glaring things about Leinster's performances generally this year, even when they've been winning, that it just hasn't been crisp. And that seems to be an easy fix and something that would obviously jump out to any coach watching it, I would have thought.
Yeah, like when I'm watching a game, I'm watching for very different things than, for example, if I'm watching it with Dominic Ryan, who's a back row, and he's focused on breakdown, physical duels, that kind of stuff. But like, I love the intricacies and the skill of passing. And when you break it down, did the player reach out and catch the ball early, or were they catching it into their chest and then having to reload? Were their hands dropping? What was their finish of their pass like? Like, that was the stuff that Joe Schmidt would have drilled into us. And it was when we'd be doing, pretty simple passing drills, he would have running commentary going, and he would be picking out elements of each person's pass if he wasn't happy. And if you got a good one away, he might say it to you, and you'd feel great about it. But by doing that, it would compound training session on training session, week on week. And when he'd be doing one-on-one reviews with you, he'd be saying to you, look, lads, in this situation, look at your finish. You've finished with your right hand over your left shoulder, and no wonder you've pulled the pass behind the player outside you. You've got to finish with your arms long. The stats show you that the percentage of the pass being more accurate when you finish hands to the target is far greater. So I need you to do that. I'm not too sure if that detail is there, but the thing is, in rugby at the moment, you can only chase after so many things, right? And if pass accuracy isn't what Leinster think is going to result in them winning games, maybe they're focusing on other areas that they feel is going to result in them winning games.
And when you watch them, like, some of the things you alluded to there, Joe Schmidt would point out, like, is there anything that when you're watching them you're saying, oh, they're doing X or they're doing Y and that's why it's not as crisp? Is anything leaping off the screen, or when you're at the matches that you're seeing?
It's never one thing,
Yeah,
is what I'd say. But certain players will have quirks or tendencies. So, for example, a player may not have the confidence to catch the ball early, to really reach out and catch it. What does that give you? It gives you the ability to just move the ball straight across your chest, and that saves time. But time is money, and that's the difference between the player outside you beating the guy on the outside or being able to manipulate the defender. If you take an extra split second with the ball, that opportunity can go. That's the difference between a player jumping out of the line and not jumping out of the line. So it's probably a multitude of things, but I wouldn't be able to pick out one thing in particular. But what I will say is it doesn't look as slick as it has done in previous years.
Yeah, for sure. So when we go to those stats, like, Munster with more line breaks, with more defenders beaten, with more offloads, with more territory, with more possession, it was a real, like, kind of bend but don't break defensive performance. Like, Leinster only conceded their first try of the game in the last 10 minutes. Like, why were Munster not able to make more hay with those numbers? Because, as we said, like, if you look at those in isolation, you would assume they would put up 20 plus points, but they weren't able to break down that Leinster defence. Like, what were you seeing why were Leinster able to hold them out? Why were Munster not able to capitalise?
Yeah, and full credit to Munster. They did play a lot, and when you do have that ambition, you learn a lot more about yourself in games. You want to be winning. Let's not get away from that. But they will have learned a lot from that. One of the criticisms I would have had from probably the first 60 minutes, they know with how Leinster defend with that, high press or rush defense, there is space in the wide channels. But if you try and go there too early, or your depth isn't right, or your pass accuracy isn't right, you've got the likes of Tommy O'Brien coming at you like a train. And if you get it wrong, it's a knock on. Leinster scrum was dominant on the night, and that was proven costly. Whereas when Munster started getting the pay from their attack, they were earning the right to move it to width. They'd gone, a positive carry backed up by another positive carry, quick ruck ball, which meant that the Leinster defence was retreating slightly or not fully loaded in a cohesive fashion where they could all come off the line together. And then Munster's passing improved as the night went on, and they were able to move the ball into those wide channels. And Leinster really did look exposed, especially down their left-hand side. And they had a couple of opportunities at the end where like they could have got over, but yeah, you know, having played in those tight games, you'd much rather be the team holding on than the team chasing a try.
Yeah, and when you say then down the left side that Munster made a lot of hay, was that like James Lowe being isolated? Like what was like what was could jump out to you?
Yeah, like when you're playing a high press, like one of the big strengths that South Africa have, and I've spoken to Luke Fitzgerald at length about this, because like I'm a big fan of the high press, and I think I've been a big advocate for Ireland bringing it in as their defensive system. And Luke made the valid point. He was like, I think he likes the system, but what we landed on kind of together was maybe we don't quite have the players to execute it. And what the likes of South Africa have is they've wingers that are, really quick and agile. They can get high, but if the opposition play the ball over the top, they actually have the speed and the agility to turn and burn and still cover the edge. And it's also tied in, with how cohesive the attacking coach and the defensive coach are with South Africa. They work together. Right. So when South Africa are defending, they're fresh. They have the ability to get off the line. Like every team wants to get off the line. No one wants to be passive. But if you've gone through, really long attacking set and now you're defending, you're not going to get the line speed from your interior players. What does that result in? It results in the opposition ball players having more time to make their decisions, to get passes away, to use footwork and to move the ball to the edge. Leinster's line speed was beginning to slow a little bit as the game was going on, so it wouldn't solely be on James Lowe, but it's also down to his ability to either get really high and shut it down, or his ability to turn and burn.
Yeah, I suppose it's part of the defensive system that they're implementing. Who kind of stood out to you from a Leinster perspective then in them getting over the line? Joe McCarthy has looked really, really powerful since he's come back. Like it was all very doom and gloom at the end of November, and you're thinking, God, though, there was a difference he would have made if he had been fit, could have been significant, especially in that South Africa game. James Ryan put in a big shift as well. Josh van der Flier looked very good. Caelan Doris was competing at every single breakdown, as he often does. I thought so the Leinster pack were probably the drivers. I don't know what you thought.
Yeah, I'd echo all of those points. I think Porter played well. I thought he scrummed well, in particular in the first half.
It was a big game for him as well, wasn't it? Like,
yeah.
Obviously, I think after November, obviously the South Africa game, then he has an injury. Paddy McCarthy comes in and catches the eye. He kind of needed to make a bit of a statement, didn't he?
Yeah, and look, he would have scrummaged against Alan Alatoa a lot in training, and he definitely had the measure of him. And I think that you could argue that Martin was a little bit lenient. I thought there was a few scrums that were nudging forward that he was happy to let Leinster play away. And I was impressed with Harry. The big change for me with Harry is he used to make a couple of mistakes within a game when you kind of look at it and go, that looked pretty easy. Or, maybe he'd stop concentrating on a high ball, or it'd be a poor pass, or he'd kick one out on the full. And it was nearly like because he's such a talented guy, right? But when I'd be looking at him, I'd nearly be thinking, and I'd see a bit of myself in him, maybe he just wasn't giving these kind of mundane tasks the respect that they deserved. And this year, he's largely cut out these mistakes, and he's playing the system really well. And what I was impressed about him at the weekend was his execution, whether it was his passing. If he was deciding to kick, he was finding grass. If he was deciding to go aerial, he was giving his chasing players an opportunity to get up and compete. And then look, the nuts and bolts of rugby union. He's a good tackler. He's a big guy. Like, I think he's about 6'2". He gets his body in front really well. And then the final point is his goal kicking. He's a top quality goal kicker. When he's standing over his kicks, I've total confidence of his ball flight and where it's going to end up. And I think he's trending at north of 85% for the year. But it's the process that he goes through. I really, really like how he goal kicks. And yeah, like he doesn't quite have the X factor passing under pressure that the likes of Prendergast will have. But the more he plays, the sharper his instincts will get, and he'll continue to improve.
He had a beautiful kick from that free kick off. I think I was off a scrum and he floated it in,
Mm.
22, and I think Leinster got a 3-pointer in the kind of phases after that. So like for you, who is the Leinster starting out half at the moment?
It'll be very interesting. Like, I'm not too sure how they will go this week with Connacht. I'd imagine they'll rotate with 2 European games coming up, where they'll be targeting as many points as possible with how the seedings work in the Champions Cup. So I'd imagine Prendergast will start this week, like, having been rested this week, and I think he'll need a really big performance to get back in. I think Harry has been consistently good, and has earned the shirt and has earned the right to hold on to it.
It's interesting because, like, I saw a few people say, "Oh, look, see, Leo Cullen said Prendergast was rested for Munster. That's why that's the only reason he wasn't playing." But like, Leo Cullen could have rested Sam Prendergast for Ulster and started him against Munster if he wanted to. Like Harry Byrne started against Leicester in what was up to that point the biggest game of the season. And Leo Cullen decided to rest Sam Prendergast. He had to pick one game and decided to do it for the biggest game of the Interpros over Christmas. So for me, that gives me an inkling into his thinking that they're leaning towards Harry.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. Like, if I was competing for that 10 shirt, and those 4 games listed in front of you, you could only pick 2. You're going, well, the Leicester away game is going to have a higher value on it than Quinn's at home, and as is Munster over the Ulster game. Despite both games being away. It also probably gives you an insight into what matters for away games: defence. And Harry's a stronger defender than Sam is at the moment.
Yeah. Anything else Munster related that you want to touch on? Like, they're Ulster away on Friday night. They're still second in the table, but they've lost 2 home games in the last kind of period. The Stormers one, which they were in a great position and let slip, and then the Leinster one, where, as we went through the stats, they dominated the stats in many ways and still couldn't get over the line. Now, they are still in second, but they could have put themselves in a really strong position in the league, and we know how much the standings are so crucial with home games later in the year. And then Ulster away, if Munster have to rest a couple of guys ahead of the Champions Cup, all of a sudden becomes very tricky, because, as you said, Ulster are playing quite well. Like, where are they for you at the moment, kind of halfway through Clayton McMillan's first season?
Yeah, I think it's a really tricky fixture coming up for them. And the reason for that is, what they're going to be facing versus Ulster is very different to what they faced against Leinster. Ulster's attack is challenging a lot of teams. Their efficiency. Mark Sex is doing a fantastic job with how they're moving the ball, moving the point of contact, working the short side. They'll make 10, 15, 20 meters, and they won't exhaust themselves. Then they'll put the ball aerially accurate, which Jack Murphy and Doak in particular do really well. They've got quality chasers like Jacobs doing really well in the air. What's the winger who's playing sevens? His name?
Werner Koch?
No, well, Werner Koch's playing great.
Oh, Zach Ward. Zach Ward.
Yeah. Like, Zach is similar to Tommy and Ethan Hooker. Modern winger, repeat effort, gets up and makes a contest, makes something happen of those aerial duels. The concerning part for Ulster is, like, they'll get themselves ahead like they did against Connacht, and they just didn't quite close that game out. That would give you a bit more confidence. But I would be thinking Ulster will win that game. Just quite often when teams play Leinster, they're fairly exhausted after it. Like, it takes a lot out of you, the physical exertion and the emotional exertion of that contest, to then have to travel up to the Affidea Stadium and play Ulster. They'll be waiting in the long grass for that one. That will be one that Richie will really want to win.
If I'm an Ulster supporter, I would be so enthused about what I've seen this season. I think they're playing good rugby. All of a sudden, when I go through their 23, they've had a couple of injuries. They seem to have options all of a sudden again that they didn't seem to have in the last few years. Like, they brought on Angus Bell and Tom O'Toole at half-time, like, at the weekend. Tom Stewart is having a really good season. Like, Izashukwu is back. He got man of the match. Like, we know how exciting he is. I think their back play has been really good. Werner Koch, I love watching him play. He's a real handful. As you said, Zach Ward, who came from sevens and a little bit of a flyer. Obviously, his dad, Andy Ward, would be well known up in Ulster. Like, I think he's been very impactful. Stockdale has been very good this year. Balakoon has been good, but he's been injured now again, which is a shame. And in the centre, they have Hume, McCluskey, and Jude Postlethwaite. Like, it's funny, Frawley, we can talk about Kieran Frawley's going to Connacht. I actually think him and Ulster would have been like, if I don't know if he had a choice of this thing, but like him slotting into that Ulster backline, I think would have made more sense. I know there's rumours of Carberry potentially being in the frame for Ulster as well, but I think Ulster all of a sudden I'm very enthused about them. I don't know, maybe I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, but and they haven't finished off some of those games as well, which will be frustrating to them. But considering how last season went, where they had some horrid results, there wasn't much enthusiasm going into this season. I think they've been really good.
No, they have, and one of the few positives from having an injury crisis and having to go deep into the depth chart is you find out, who's up to it in your squad, and they've really uncovered some quality players from having to do that. Like Zach Ward this time last year was largely unheard of as regards the 15s game, and then he was fantastic in the Champions Cup, and he's now kind of locking down that wing slot. He can play on both sides. Jude Postlethwaite, another guy who played a huge amount of games last year and is really kind of figuring out, the difference between playing underage and playing, professional rugby, and knowing when to do an offload and when to look after the ball. And, that's been a big area of growth for him that I've been impressed with him this season. The one caveat I'd say with the Ulster squad, like they are dependent on certain players. Like Henderson is really important for him, getting him back fit. Like Augustus getting injured at the weekend, like he like just where they struggled a bit last year was just being able to kind of keep the gain line, and not like overly fatiguing themselves. And like Bell and Augustus have been great signings in that sense. And then obviously I think their attack is more efficient now with Sexton coming in. But yeah, like they've got off, and they've had tricky fixtures as well. They've got the South African trip out of the way. They've played Leinster at home. There's a couple of easier fixtures coming their way. But this Munster one is a really, really important one for them. Like I'd kind of say if Ulster can win this, then you're kind of thinking, right, they're a top 4 side. Whereas if they don't, then you're probably thinking top 8. But you definitely think they'll be back in the Champions Cup next year with the way they're playing.
Oh yeah, they're guaranteed top 8. As you say, this win on Friday, it's all about maybe getting top 4. As you said, wouldn't underestimate how key it was what they did in South Africa. Like the Sharks can be a bit of a punchline, but the Sharks picked a full-on team. Like they had Etzebeth, Khaleesi, Ethan Hooker, every Springbok guy I think basically was available, and Ulster won with the bonus point. And then even when they didn't play as well against the Lions, they got away with a try-scoring bonus point. And they have that Edinburgh refixture coming at some stage in the season, and depending on who's available for Edinburgh, if they might not have their Scottish players available, so that could be a winnable game too. So yeah, definitely. Yeah, this one feels like a big one on Friday.
Even like not competing in the Champions Cup, while like obviously that's where they want to be.
Yeah,
it does allow you breathers. Like they rotated for the Cardiff game and left them fresh in the Challenge Cup, left them fresher for the Leinster game. Again, like you're not going and playing Claremont and Bath or Leicester through January. You're going to have weaker opposition there, which is going to leave you with less injuries, a fresher squad. So yeah, that is one of the advantages with being in the Challenge Cup.
Yeah, and they have a trip to Amsterdam to face the Cheetahs in a couple of weeks. That's where that game is being played in the Challenge Cup. So Ulster fans get a fun weekend away as well. If they won't be in the Champions Cup, but a weekend in Amsterdam, I'd say a few people might enjoy that. So they got the win on Saturday against Connacht. As you said earlier, the first half was unfortunately like a very Connacht-like half. Like how they went in trailing 12-10 after the balance of play in that half is crazy. They were 10-0 up, but even within that, like Sam Gilbert pulled a penalty that was it was a poor effort. Even going for it, it was kind of on the kind of towards the touchline. You're assuming they'd nudge that into the corner in that kind of interpro. They knocked on, I think, 2 other balls in the 22, and I think Ulster got another turnover near the line, so it could have well been like 15-17 at that stage. Zach Ward goes over to cut it to 10-7, and then I think Connacht give away like 3 penalties in a row. Like they kick deep, give away a penalty. I think from the subsequent line they give away another penalty. Then Ulster go into the 22, they give away another penalty, and it ends up with Zach Ward scoring a second try. And then, as you say, the 2 early tries in the second half kind of killed it as a contest to some degree. But then Connacht, in Connacht fashion, like they keep fighting and they keep playing and they get 2 tries and then give away a very sloppy penalty to allow Jack Murphy see it out, like just kind of barging into the side of a ruck, one of the substitutes. So it was kind of the full gamut of the good, the bad and the Connacht on Saturday night. Like, where do you assess where they are? I know there's some statistics that you sent to me beforehand that you wanted to highlight about how they're playing and stuff. It's been a very interesting first block for Stuart Lancaster. It hasn't been the immediate bounce maybe people would have expected or hoped for.
No, not quite. Now, look, he's only 8 games in or 10 games in. Actually, they'd won postponed, so 9 games in to the season. But I think what was working for Ireland back in 2023, what was working for Lancaster with Leinster through 18 to 23 is very different to what's working now. And we've spoken about it already. Going high into the phase count is, in my opinion, tiring the team out and leaving them exposed defensively. And when I'm looking at stats, like they can be a bit misleading at times, and you can also find stats that suit your narrative. So I've gone and done that. But they concede the most from possession in the opposition half, concede tries. So they're conceding tries from distance. They're not making the opposition work hard for their tries. They score the majority of their points after 6+ phases. 60% of tries are scored within 3 phases. Yet Connacht are scoring their points, the majority of their points, after 6+ phases. It's taking them a long time to score. So when you're looking at them, like, they're putting together really good passages of play. So they could start attacking from the halfway line and move the ball to width, and they're progressing forward, and they get to the opposition 22. And finally, you get into the red zone, and you want to be targeting, when you're in the red zone, you want to be coming away with points between 30 and 50% of the time. But the issue with Connacht is it's required so much energy for them to get in there, because it hasn't been efficient, that their carries in the 22 aren't impactful. They're not clearing the breakdown quickly enough. The ruck ball's not fast enough. And when you end up in kind of an arm wrestle in there, you're going to get exposed at a breakdown, and teams are going to get a poach, or you'll force an error, or you'll get the ball bouncing out of the ruck with efficient counter rucking. And that's what's happening with Connacht. Like, what I'd say with Lancaster is he making them better rugby players? Absolutely. Like, they're better passers. They're better. It's a better defensive effort, like some of than it was last year. But the system is falling on its face because the guys are tired. And then the big one alongside the attacking style is, like, Connacht kick the ball a lot, and they kick the ball both long, and they also kick the ball contestably. But when they kick the ball contestably, they just simply aren't winning it back enough. They're not creating that breaking ball or winning it cleanly. And if you're kicking the ball contestably, you're only progressing yourself 20, 25 meters up the field. And for the opposition to then get possession back, it's putting you under significant pressure. If you're kicking the ball long, and you're doing it to someone like Jacob Stockdale, he has the strength and the agility to just run it straight back, keep his feet for a couple of seconds to allow support to get back to him. They resource the ruck, go a phase, maybe 2 phases, and then they're putting the ball back early, landing where the initial kick came from Connacht. So you've now got a 50-50 opportunity where Connacht were in possession in the initial instance. So that's kind of the trend that I'm seeing with them at the moment. It's certainly not for lack of effort, like, and we've seen them finish games really strongly. Like, they managed to get a 4-try bonus point, 3 tries in the final part of the Dragons game. They score a lot in the final 20 minutes, which would show that they're aerobically fit. He's definitely improved their fitness, but there's a difference between being aerobically fit and being able to go 10 phases and loads of lactic in your legs and then having to defend. That's not aerobic fitness. That's a different type of fitness, and that's where I feel like they're getting caught out.
And I'm intrigued by the notion that you said, like, what worked in 2023 might not work now, like that he's maybe trying to implement what was successful, say, when he was with Leinster with this Connacht team, and rugby has changed, and whether that can still have the success it would have had. Because that's kind of almost a wider discussion. The Connacht are almost a test case, because, like, I know what I prefer watching as just someone watching matches, but if it's not going to be as successful, do you have to change your philosophy or how you like to do things? It's an interesting kind of big picture question, I suppose.
Yeah, and that's the great way that rugby is played. There's different ways to skin a cat, and, like, I'm only giving my opinion on what I think that they should do, but I'm sure they have their own opinion, and if they stick to it, they'll believe that it will work. But, like, we've spoken about Toulouse and how they keep the ball alive, and how that works for them. Bristol play an expansive style of rugby, but there's a real efficiency to how Bristol do it, and there's a real intricacy to how they play. There's if you compare the Connacht attack to the Bristol attack, there's a lot more blunt force with the Connacht attack, where there's much more deception with the Bristol one. And then you talk about how Ulster attack. It's not that I'm saying, oh, you need to kick the ball and you win the aerial contest, and that's where the game is won and lost. Far from it. But that is my opinion on where I think they're being caught out at the moment.
As someone who's watching rugby, like, do you like watching the aerial contests? Just as a spectator.
Yeah, I do. Like I enjoy a good kick tennis because, you know, I remember playing it and it wasn't a particular strength of my game. So, you know, when someone like George Ford is probably the best in the business at it, of like a sustained kick contest, whether to kick the corner, whether to go aerial, knowing when his team is fatigued to get the ball off the pitch. Like, there's a real art form to that. As regards getting the ball early and a good contest, I actually do like it, because someone like Tommy O'Brien, who's, you know, very good at getting his timing of his jump, deciding whether to go with two hands or one hand, how he's getting his body shape, his momentum through the catch. And then what does that give you when you win it, or you get the breaking ball? It gives you the opportunity to attack against unstructured, and that's exciting to watch. It's the outcome of what it gives you, not necessarily just watching the ball, you know, going up in the air.
I just think there's a fundamental, like, almost unfairness to the contest, whereby, like, if I'm... So, yes, sorry, this happened in the Munster-Leinster game. At one stage, Shane Daly jumped for a ball and went to slap it back with one hand and got the timing all wrong and just slapped it forward. And there was a funny replay of him just saying, for F's sake, like... So he's allowed and able to go for that. And all he has to do is kind of swipe it back with one hand, whereas the Leinster player, say it was James Lowe, I'm not sure if it was, has to go for it with two hands to catch it cleanly, because realistically he's not going to go up and try to bat it back onto his own side, really, because that could just create more harm than it's worth, like if he's just batting it back blindly. So the team kicking the ball away it's a much easier task for them to just to go up with one hand and just like kind of slap it back. They don't care where it goes, because they're not going to win the ball if they don't slap it back in the first place. Whereas the team receiving the ball almost have to be a lot more traditional in how they're approaching it. They have to like jump up with two hands and try to catch it cleanly, because to do anything else would kind of just be pointless and kind of crazy. So for me, that's why I really don't like watching it, because I'm like, this isn't a fair fight, in my opinion. Not that it's easy to necessarily win it back with the one hand, but like jumping up with one hand and slapping it that's not rugby. That's not a rugby skill. Like, that's just, we're not playing volleyball, like, you know, but that's what a lot of it is. Like, you mentioned Tom Roebuck, he's good at doing it, but like, for me, there's a fundamental unfairness to the nature of the contest.
Yeah, and it favours guys that are tall. Like, you think of the Bath game and you've got Joe Cockanasinga, who's 6'4", going over the top of Takir Abrahams, who's maybe 5'8". Like, he no matter how high Takir jumps, and even if he's catching it with two hands above his head, Joe's one is beating him every time and creating that breaking ball. And you've teams like Bath and South Africa that they'll practice, you know, winning the scraps till the cows come home. I remember speaking to Dwayne Vermeulen about it and how South Africa were doing it 5 years ago. They're obsessed with practicing winning the scraps, and because of the escorting laws, it's very difficult to have the team that's receiving the kick to have players in position to win the scraps, because you kind of have to clear the space for the oncoming runners to get in there. So if anything, it's actually favors the team that's kicking the ball to win the scraps, because they can have more people in position. And you're also not going to be batting the ball back when you're the last man behind, you know, because there's only probably going to be maybe your winger there to gather the ball. So if you don't get it, it can result in a try for the opposition. So when that law was originally brought in, well, I agree with you. I was actually thinking I'd say we'll see this law for a while, and then I think it will be a penalty for slapping back. You have to try and catch the ball cleanly.
Well, that should be the next step, I think. That's when it would become more of a fair fight. I would like to see the Shane Dailies or those wingers penalised as a penalty against him for a deliberate knock on. If you're going to go up for the one-handed slap back, okay, maybe if you get it back, but you're running the risk if it goes forward, you should be penalised with the penalty. That would make it more fair because it would be a risk. At the moment, there's no risk for Shane Daly or Ethan Hooker or Tom Roebuck jumping up, trying to beach volleyball it, like meet the parents, like, you know, back onto your own side. And then it goes forward and it's just a scrum. And if you have a great scrum, as Tadhg Beirne says, then you're probably happy with that outcome. Whereas that's not fair. I think you should at least have to make a legitimate attempt to either catch the ball, or if they're going to let you do it one-handed, I think if it goes forward, you should be penalised with a deliberate knock-on.
Yeah, and look, it ties into how the scrum has gone. Like when I was playing even a few years ago, it was very rare on your own put in that you would have a penalty going against you. Like you see that all the time now, where like it can be your own ball and you get penalised at the scrum. And look, it's not my area of strength, but I know it's like the break foot and having to hook the ball, that it can actually be easier scrummaging when you're not putting it in. So yeah, look, that's definitely tied into it. When it's a genuine aerial duel, you know, it's resulting in a scrum 1 and 3 times. Like that's a lot of scrums. And then the other, like if we're talking about law changes, and I'm not mad on it, to be honest, because you can end up tinkering with the game, and quite often you think it's going to work out really well and it doesn't. But like if we're talking about attacking, flowing rugby, because the breakdown is trended in favor of the defending team, you now have like the attacking team support players. They're so focused on getting to the breakdown, like they're not thinking of like running a good line or being deceptive. Their number one concern is, I need to get to the breakdown quickly. And even if you do that now, and this happened at the game at the weekend, there was players there arriving really quickly, but it's such a split second in the sense that the defending player has got in the poach position, that even though they're there quickly, they're still losing the ball. And I've thought about this, you know, long and hard. I think the first defending player should have to win the space over the ball, in the sense that he can counter ruck. And then when he's then won the space, the next defending player can come in and poach the ball. And I also think it will make the game safer, because that we're seeing plenty of injuries with poachers, like guys getting blasted out of the way. Where do you hit them? They get hit on the head, or they get lower limb injuries around the hip area, hamstring, knees. And I just think it should be, to win the ball back as the defending team, you have to win the contest. And that's kind of the solution I've landed on now. I'm sure there's going to be lots of poaching back rowers that aren't going to be delighted with that, because that's their point of difference. But yeah, it would suit certain players, like someone like Joe McCarthy, who's a brilliant counter rucker. It would suit his game, not necessarily a poacher of the ball.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as you said, if you said before, kind of the breakdown is almost tied in with the kicking element of it. Like they're kind of interlinked in some ways in terms of how the effect they're having on the game overall. Just to finish up, obviously this is our last rugby show of 2025. We will be turning the page quickly into 2026 with Ulster Munster on Friday and Leinster Connacht on Saturday. I would throw a couple of quick fire questions at you. We didn't prepare for this, so I am putting you on the spot slightly. But they won't be difficult, don't worry. As we finish 2025, the best rugby player in Ireland is who?
Ooh, I think the best and the most important are probably two different things. Look, Gibson Park, you know, in the system that both Leinster and Ireland play is really the key guy in my opinion. We saw how much we missed Joe McCarthy in autumn, and the way the game has gone, it just trends towards these power athletes, and he certainly is one of those. Tadhg Beirne, he was in the team of the year. I know I'm probably cheating here by picking a few guys, but
Tadhg Beirne was the guy who came to my head when I asked the question, I think.
Yeah. No, look, he's a phenomenal rugby player, and is going to be such a key part of you know, Ireland competing in the next World Cup and everything that Munster do.
The best player in the world right now today is
there's only one man for that. Like that game last night, it was comical how better than everyone he was. Like I think he had 2 tries, 5 assists. Quite often when you're watching it on the TV, you can kind of go, oh, that's on. He will do stuff that hasn't even crossed your mind. Like the crossfield kick that he hits, like, I don't know, they're 10 metres out from the La Rochelle try line.
It's Antoine Dupont, sorry. It's Antoine Dupont you're talking about.
We know who it is.
You don't even need to say who it is, but people do, yes.
Yeah. Like physically, he picks the ball up, he assesses one side of the breakdown, it's not on, goes the other side, bang, fend off like a cannon into like a powerful forward, fends him off, has the acceleration to go away. His box kicking is just different level because he kicks off both feet. It's a total nightmare for the opposition backfield to cover him. It was arguably what won them the Champions Cup against Leinster because, arguably one of the best fielders in the game. Like Hugo had a tough day that day. But yeah, look, he's head and shoulders. He's the best to have ever played the game, in my opinion. And he looks better after that injury. I don't know how that's possible, but he certainly hasn't lost any speed or power.
Yeah, great to see him hit the ground running because an ACL, sometimes it can take like a good period of time for someone to get back to their best. But no, as you say, he looks scintillating. So no doubt he'll be in Paris on Thursday in a couple of weeks' time against Ireland. The best coach in the world right now, I'm assuming you're going to say a certain individual, but in case there's anyone else you think, who's the best coach in the world right now?
Oh, look, 2-time winning World Cup, number one team in the world. He's always one step ahead, Razzie. He is always one step ahead. And when I'm talking about, defensive coaches and attacking coaches working in a cohesive fashion, he's doing that with South Africa. When we're talking about hybrid backs and forwards with the likes of Esterhazen, he's doing that. He's willing to try stuff and fail, but that is often the best way to learn. And that is why he's the trendsetter. And for the moment, he's one step ahead and possibly two.
Yeah, because as you say, like the CV, we know what he's won. He's been good at refreshing the coaching staff, getting different ideas in. Some selection decisions he's made have been criticised and haven't worked, but he's fairly ruthless at quick at correcting them. So like the mistakes he has made, he's kind of changed the 10 and then gone, okay, no, we'll go back to this guy. Or when he's experimented and hasn't gone wrong or right, as you say, he's changed it.
And even like you look at how he manages the media. He uses the media as a weapon. He's very strategic how he does it. He'll plan certain stuff. The mind games he does when he's picking his team, start of the week, didn't do it for us for whatever reason. When South Africa were playing Ireland, the only time they didn't announce the team early. Having a referee part of the team, part of the coaching team. Like now France are doing it. Now we're talking about doing it. And then the coaching team that he surrounded himself with, like Tony Brown was a really smart, and that's added an extra dimension to South Africa's attack. And Irish guys like Jerry Flannery's doing a great job there, and like the real brains behind that South African operation is Felix Jones. Like how we didn't get him back into the Irish system is one of the biggest missed opportunities that has come in this World Cup cycle.
Don't worry, that's the end of the quick wire questions. I'm not going to throw you any curveballs. I just wanted to throw a few things at you and get your thoughts. Well, that's it for 2025. Thanks to everyone who listened to the rugby content this year. We'll have more podcasts throughout the week, of course. Ian will be back with us in 2026. It promises to be a great year. We have Champions Cup around the corner, then into the Six Nations, starting with that brilliant game on a Thursday night in France. So we all have that to look forward to over the next while. Ian, thanks so much for joining us, not only today, but throughout the year.
Thanks a million, Will. It's been a pleasure, and Happy New Year to everyone listening.